Hello, I'm Julie Swenson, Managing Director of Forward Theater Company in Madison, Wisconsin.
And I'm Mike Fisher, a Milwaukee-based theater writer and dramaturg.
And I'm Jen Uphoff-Gray, founder and artistic director of Forward Theater Company, and this is Theater Forward, a monthly conversation about theater from a local, regional, and national perspective. From Madison to Manhattan, we're excited to share insights into our own company while exploring issues surrounding theater in the Midwest and around the country. Welcome to episode 123 of Theater Forward.
Hooray!
1, 2, 3.
1, 2, 3. And in this episode, we are going to be talking about one of the most contentious issues in modern American theater, play length, and whether or not to have an intermission. It's, I'm being a little bit overly dramatic, a little bit facetious, but it's true. It is a big thing. Audiences have really strong feelings, pro and con, about play length and about whether or not there's an intermission. And working on new plays, you see what are the trends. Working on brand new plays, then it comes to the whole debate of, does this play have an intermission or not? I will say, as we start this conversation, I think it's worth clarifying for folks who might be listening who are not, working in theater themselves. It's not up to the producers whether or not there's an intermission, at least for any play that's not a classic in the public domain. If you license a play, you are doing an intermission if the playwright puts one in, and you are not doing an intermission if the playwright has not put one in. So really our decision making comes at the point of whether or not we want to do the play, not whether or not an intermission will be in it. So that feels like a good thing to clarify right out of the gate. But I have lots of feelings about this, but I know you both do as well. And so, Mike, Julie, you're going to jump in.
I just wanted to do a little history lesson of the way people used to read plays or see plays. I produced a play called Memoir by John Murrell many years ago. It is about Sarah Bernhardt. Our Sarah Bernhardt was Angela Iannone, and her assistant was played by Michael Wright. Fantastic play, but we did a lot of research about the great Sarah Bernhardt, French actor, who toured around the United States in the turn of the century. So late 19th century, early 20th. Her shows were 4 hours, all in French.
Love it.
And she did stop at the Pabst Theater. As best as I can see, it was either Phaedra or Le Dame de, what is that, Kamala or whatever, however you pronounce that. But 4 hours in French. That's how we used to watch plays. Now let's talk about modern audiences.
Well, hey, it's how we still watch Wagner, but that's
right.
German rather than French. I love that. I love the sound of a 4-hour play, but I'd settle for more plays just with intermissions, or even plays with 2 intermissions. When we had B.J. Jones on last month, in our last one, I was thinking, when he did Prayer for the French Republic by Joshua Harmon this last year, that was the first time I had seen a play with 2 intermissions, a regular play, not something which is an extravaganza, in forever. I actually can't remember the last time I went to a 2 intermission. I mean, I'm thinking Beth Henley's play, Crimes of, what's that play? The great play that she did.
Crimes of the Heart.
Yeah, Crimes of the Heart. The Milwaukee Chamber had 2 intermissions a billion years ago. And I mean, I'm sure there's others that have happened in between in terms of regular length plays. I can't think of many. I love them. I love intermissions because not only because as I get older, I suffer from an increasingly chronic case of TB, tiny bladder disease, like lots of people, but also because it gives you an opportunity to reflect on what it is that you have seen, absorb something. If a play is big like that, and the Henley play and the Harmon play are actually 2 good examples, it's covering a lot of territory. And having time to reflect on what it is that you've just seen. And also, hey, a community is what theater is all about. Talking to the people in the seats around you is really special. And if we're about building community, that's one of the ways, certainly not the only way. And I'm not saying you have to have it, but it helps build a community. You talk to the seatmates that you may not know. some of whom end up maybe becoming friends. I can think of countless examples actually of how this has happened for me. And I miss that, even though there's a little part of me, especially when I was still a critic and I knew I had to go home and write, that would walk into a space and see, oh, this is 90 minutes, no intermission. And I will acknowledge a little part of me is like, yes, I'm going to get to bed before 1 in the morning. So, I get that side of it, but I miss the intermission. I really do.
It's interesting. I was thinking about this topic, and I remembered reading an article. I had to do a little digging to find it again. But Charles McNulty wrote a piece back in 2017 for the LA Times, specifically on the topic of whither the intermission. And I think he was more of the I like that plays are shorter uh now a camp, but he sort of went into a lot of the pros and cons. But there was one thing he said in there that really resonated with me, because I think this is a good thing in the way things have changed, because you're absolutely right. Plays used to be a lot longer. They just used to be a lot longer, and for good and for ill. Sometimes there's a lot of padding in those plays, and they might have been more effective, tighter. I agree with you, Mike, that the intermission can be this beautiful opportunity to reflect and process what you've seen and get ready to process and see more. On the other hand, I know a lot of playwrights who prefer a play without an intermission, not because they don't want it to be long, but because they don't want the audience to step out of the story and then have to step and sort of ramp back into it. There's artistic pros and cons, but the point that McNulty made that resonated with me and I'm quoting, the stretching out of plays by intermissions might make sense for producers worried about the sales revenue of overpriced food and drink, but the practice is a holdout from an era when people had discrete work hours, less harried commutes, and minds that were free of Facebook, Twitter, and email nudges. And I think that it's a valid thing. We can talk about, well, our attention spans are shorter, and yeah, of course they are. But it's not just because people spend all day scrolling Facebook. It's also very few jobs are clock in, clock out jobs anymore. You sometimes have to travel very far to get to live theater. You sometimes costs keep going up, and so what you're paying your babysitter and what you're paying to park and everything keeps going up and up and up. And so I think that there are a lot of societal reasons why coming and having the time and space to sit for a long play have also evolved. It does become more, and we can talk about some of the really fun examples of sort of event theater, um, where people really plan for it. But as a sort of normal, I'm going to my subscription series kind of experience, I think it's getting harder and harder for people to carve that kind of time out. And we can regret that, but it doesn't change those circumstances necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, all completely fair. I would say with the shorter attention span problem, paradoxically, the intermission might be one way to help solve it. Because
Hmm.
what I'm seeing, especially if the play is not great, but even sometimes if it is, given our attention spans, people start looking at their watches, or they think surreptitiously, haha, everybody in the theater can see them, looking at their phone to see what the time is, once you hit that 1 hour mark or maybe 70-minute mark, sort of wondering what's going on here. Whereas if you have intermissions, you can avoid all that. So, for example, I just saw a glorious production, the first non-equity production I've ever seen of Angels in America, by Invictus Theater in Chicago. It runs, by the way, through September 7th. I highly recommend it. And you can see it in the two pieces of it, Millennium Approaches and Perestroika, in 2 separate days if you want. It's set up that way. For a Wisconsinite driving down to see it, it's going to be a 1 day deal, right? I mean, we're not going to have the time, Jen, to your point about work schedules. You're going to have to do it on the day they do both, which is Saturday, which is deliberately Saturday because for many people, that's still a day away from work. And it's got 3 intermissions baked into, as I'm sure you both know, into each of the 2 parts. So you get lots of breaks plus a dinner break. And yeah, it's a long day. I mean, Invictus starts, Millennium Approaches at noon. You walk out of Perestroika at 11:30 that night. You're tired. I mean, I've never gone to a production of Angels where I wasn't tired at the end. I've also never gone to a production of Angels where when you get that speech at the end about how the audience is all beautiful, it doesn't resonate. And one of the reasons it resonates, as we are included and enfolded in this love that Kushner shares, is that we have been together for all those hours. You have had 6 breaks during which you have had lots of opportunity to meet the other people there with you, even if the conversation starts as we're in all this together. And it makes the sense that we are all pulling for what's happening on stage and pulling for each other special in a way that I just don't think, by and large, and I'm not, this is nothing against shorter plays, is possible with a shorter play. Not to mention that when you have a 7 hour extravaganza like that, even if you're not Tony Kushner and as brilliant as he is,
Mhm.
you can take on more generally, not always. They're great short plays, but they can't cover that much space. They just can't. I mean, it's 80 minutes versus 7 hours. It's not even a fair comparison. And once in a while, not for every play in a subscription, I agree, having audiences stretched in that way, both in terms of the themes that are being encompassed and in terms of their relationship to each other in the theater, is kind of cool.
I mean, we were, uh, I don't disagree with you when the right piece comes along. We talked a lot, when we were planning for our 12th season about the beautiful paired plays of Lewiston and Clarkston by Samuel D. Hunter, which we really wanted to do. And we ultimately decided to program those and to do both in one evening. And each of those two plays is about 90 minutes long, but they really are two halves of a whole. And we thought, you know what, we're going to take a risk here. We're going to experiment and we're going to really build this as a real undertaking. It's not a 7 hour Angels, but for a contemporary theater that mostly does plays under 2 hours, to say we're going to do a 90-minute show and then have a half-hour intermission to do the changeover, and then we're going to do another 90-minute show. Um, we were excited and trepidatious about how that was going to go, because
Mhm.
it was we were going to test and see what the audience's interest in something like that was. Now, as folks may know, our season 12 turned out to be our COVID year season, and we did Lewiston Clarkston as a filmed piece of theater, so folks could watch it at completely their own pace. So the experiment goes untried here at Forward, but um, the reality is that even to do something that would be 3.5 hours long for a company like ours is actually a big experimental thing. Whereas, again, we often refer to our colleagues at American Players
Yeah,
Theater, 45 minutes to the west of us, and that's a normal running length for the classics.
right.
And it's just a different kind of an experience that's being planned.
It's 2 different conversations in some ways. I think about, like, there's the event theater, like you're talking about, Mike, Angels in America, and you're gonna go. You're gonna go the whole day. When I was in high school was when, Life and Adventures of Nicholas Nickleby came out, at 8.5 hours. You know that. You go to American Players Theater, it's a journey, it's an event, and 3 hours is kind of standard. And actually, I think, Mike, our town had 2 intermissions, if
Oh,
I'm
you're
not
right. Yes, it
mistaken.
did. It did.
I'm not mistaken. But I think where we get pushback from forward theater and probably more the contemporary is when people hadn't planned on an event, had not planned on a long period of time, and and we give them a 2 hour, 2.5 hour, and we do get pushback from that. Or the amount of times we have a sign in the lobby that says, 90 minutes, no intermission, and I hear, "Yes." And I'm with you, Mike. It makes me kind of sad. Like, well, what else are you going to be doing? Why do you have to run home?
Well, I think there's kind of two aspects of that, because you're absolutely right, Julie. It's about audience expectations in a lot of ways.
Mhm.
So I think one thing, and we do this, a lot of places do this. I think clear and honest communication in advance about what the play is. If someone tells me that Act One is an hour and 10 minutes, and then there's an intermission, and Act Two is an hour and 5 minutes or whatever, great, I know what that is. Uh, if you tell me that it's a 90-minute play, no intermission, great, I know what that is. And I plan accordingly, mentally, physically. I really get PO'd when someone posts signage or on their website that it is a certain length and then it's 10 or 15 minutes longer. because those 10 or 15 minutes feel twice as long as they actually are,
Mhm.
um, which does nobody any good whatsoever. Um, I think the other part of the issue that we sometimes bump up against is that I have seen many contemporary playwrights want to have their cake and eat it too in a way that I think is not reasonable or respectful to the audience, in that they want to write a longer play and they want the audience to not take an intermission so that they are immersed in the story of the play the whole time. And we have chosen to not produce some plays that we really loved, but I have a sort of internal, like, it used to be 100 minutes. I'll go to 105 now, but like, if you're more than an hour 45 without an intermission, I'm not going to program the play, because people have physical human bodies that need to stand, to use a restroom, to get a drink of water. And the argument of like, oh, well, we see movies that are longer and they don't have it, is not a fair comparison, because when you see a movie, and if nature calls and you need to step out for 10 minutes for a reasonably, although getting less reasonably, for a reasonably modest cost and reasonably convenient exercise, I can see it again and see what I missed. I can either go back and see another screening. I can wait till the show is streaming, the movie is streaming. I can see it there. I don't have to worry that I'm inconveniencing a whole bunch of people who spent a lot of money on that ticket, who will not get another opportunity to see this play. And I'm disturbing them. I'm climbing over them. Movie aisles are also wider. So you can like get up to use the restroom in the middle of the show and not, be stumbling over other people. Like, there are a lot of physical barriers in the theater, um, to leaving and stepping out if you need to, that are not the same at a concert or a movie. And so I think it's a little disingenuous of some playwrights to not recognize that, and to it starts to feel a little punitive or disrespectful, I think, to the audience, to be like, you need to sit there for 2 hours. You need to pay a lot of money for this ticket and sit there for 2 hours and not get up to leave, or else you're going to miss something. And that rubs me the wrong way. Put an intermission in,
Yeah.
or cut your play.
Well, and you're hearing that with movies too, right? I mean, I think there's an increasing clamor with an Oppenheimer, for example, that there should have been an intermission. I mean,
Yeah.
that is just too long, for just that reason. Because, Jen, to your point in terms of work schedules, you shouldn't have to go back and see it a second time.
Right.
I mean, that's ridiculous. And I think that, so again, I'm not against intermissions breaking the flow. I mean, I think they're a good thing. I just wish we would leverage them to have longer things. And oh, by the way, I said six. Four intermissions in Angels in America, three acts in each part, two intermissions. So one day
I was
I'll
thinking, I was like,
no,
six.
one
Wow.
day I'll get my math right. But but the excitement that you get from that sort of,
Yeah.
even with our 3 hour extravaganza, the Sam Hunter 3 hour extravaganza, or something like Mr. Burns, which we had two intermissions for that, didn't we? I'm trying.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I mean, people get jazzed about that. Going to All Our Tragic that Sean Graney did in Chicago, 10 years ago, where you did all 32 Greek tragedies in a 12-hour span. And when I had to count, there were seven intermissions in this, plus a
Mhm.
dinner break, with a
Wow.
23 actor cast that was mingling with the audience during both the intermissions and particularly during the dinner break. I mean, I'll never forget that. And yeah, you can't expect people to always go do that, but giving people more of that, and places that have the resources to do it, or maybe this means co-pros. I mean, I understand that's not something we're going to do anytime tomorrow, but it's a really cool thing when it happens, and is still happening, in some places. I've talked in this podcast before about the Guthrie Theater 9 hour Shakespeare extravaganza last summer. And when those actors came back on for the third and final play that they were going to do, they could not start the play because the audience rose in a standing ovation and would not stop. I mean, it brought tears to my eyes. And that, again, is about the community, the feeling of community that you're establishing when people spend that kind of time together.
I do think the rarity of those experiences, though, also helps elevate them.
Fair.
Um, uh, yeah, and because, who these days has time to go to lots of 9-hour theater extravaganzas. But when you can carve out that day for that special experience, it heightens it, I think, in a lot of different ways. Um, but yeah, it is, we read these scripts, so many brand new or quite new scripts here at Forward, and there's no question that it is the majority of what is being written right now is plays without an intermission.
Yes.
Um, and sometimes to their detriment. If I like a compact, really well crafted play where everything that's there is needed. We no longer have to write little scenes that take place in front of the curtain while the scenery is being changed. That old Broadway model that you read the classic plays from the 30s and 40s, and you know exactly why that little scene is there. It's because they're changing the scenery behind the curtain. The fact that technology has enabled us and design advances or changes have enabled us to pare down some of what's needed, I think is wonderful in many ways. But I sometimes think that contemporary playwrights are too attached to the convention of needing it to be without an intermission. And sometimes you can get trapped. I mean, I've certainly talked with playwrights when I'm working with them on a new script and said, let's, at least for the first production, keep an intermission, because what that can mean is you have the opportunity to solve an issue in the play that needs addressing, either through addition or subtraction. um, if your play in its draft form is already, running in 90, 100 minutes, but you're still working on it, you're still workshopping it, you're still doing rewrites, uh, you kind of have to solve any issues by cutting. And sometimes you want to be able to solve it by adding, oh, this relationship is unclear. Let's add a conversation between these two characters. And so not seeing an intermission as the enemy, seeing it as an opportunity, but not one that you have to take. If you work the play and you get down to, nope, this is the story I want to tell, and you've got only 100 minutes of stage time, yeah, take the intermission out, make it compact, make it a straight through emotional experience.
Well, it's a different way of writing it too. I mean, you
Hmm.
have to you have to end a first act with
Hmm.
something that will make me wanna come back 10 or
Yeah.
20 minutes later. And so it's a different way of formatting the play that I agree with you, Jen. Playwrights aren't thinking. They're doing solid stories all the way through, and cutting it somewhere in the middle
Yeah.
doesn't give that um the suspense, the anticipation of coming back and finding out what's gonna happen.
Hmm.
Which is surprising, actually, given how many playwrights are now writing for TV. Which, by the
Hmm.
way, I mean, again,
Right.
that's a model through, and this is new in the last 25 years, but this whole golden age of television and the binge watching that accompanied it are all about recognizing that the traditional format was not sufficient for telling a full blown story, that you could not develop characters as much, that it was harder to move outside a sort of living room. Or kitchen sink setting to encompass wider social issues. I mean, at the risk of gross generalization, because both of you could shoot holes in this with 10 examples off the top of your head, I do think one of the things we're losing with shorter plays is plays that are as attuned as frequently to larger social issues. There's just not time. It might be that they're
Hmm.
ticked, in a checkbox kind of way, either through identity politics or something else. But to really take on that big stuff, which often requires a time duration as well, not time in terms of what you're watching, but time in terms of the content of the piece. It's just hard to do again in 90 minutes. So you focus more on individuals, and in a way that I think is another. It's not just the social media stuff. It's another way in which you are reflecting our culture, in which the sense of community, I think, is fraying all over the place, and in which those larger issues don't exercise the imagination in the same way that maybe they once did.
I think I don't disagree with that, Mike. I think it's more that I have a slightly different um, take on it, and that is that um, the American theater, I'm not talking about theater starting from the Greeks or, but the American theater, um, really sort of built its framework in a pre-television era. And once television sort of really came into its own, I think we turn more for that kind of epic, grappling with a big issue across lots of character kind of storytelling there. And theater has become, again, you too could come up with a dozen easy examples that contradict this. But what I go to theater for now is less that I'm going to have this comprehensive Reds type, Roots type, look at something.
Mhm.
And what I want is, because this is my chance for storytelling where I'm in the same space as that other human being on that stage, and we're living and breathing in that same shared space. And I want the more intimate story out of that experience, because I can easily get the broad scope storytelling through TV. And so I think that a lot of that change, and you're right that it's been a change in the field as a whole, is in response to what can we do that you can't get somewhere else. And I think that kind of intimacy, and again, there are TV shows that are super intimate, but um what that smaller scale as a stand-in to see yourself inside of a broad societal situation is something that theater still, I think, does better than any other form. And so it doesn't surprise me that the field has leaned into stories with that more human scale intimacy for that um, empathy building opportunity, and let a format like television that can more easily encompass tons of characters and tons of locations uh, take on that kind of storytelling there. I don't know how clear that was, but um, I think that's a reason why we see that more.
I think
Mm.
that's yeah, I think that's fair. And to contradict myself and to think of the classic American play, you do have at least two of the great four or five playwrights. I mean, O'Neill and Williams, who did focus, even though their plays were much longer, on family dramas, as opposed to somebody like Miller or Wilson. I mean, Long Day's Journey may be 3.5 hours long, but it's well, it's five characters, but four main characters, who and it's their story. I mean,
Yeah,
Cat in a
right.
Hot Tin Roof is a very yes, it's got social ramifications, but it's a claustrophobic family
Yeah.
situation that's unfolding there. So it's always been there, and none of these listeners, none of our conversational
Mhm.
generalization should be taken as 100% on anything. We're looking at trends.
Yeah. 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 But you're right. The trend is towards less of that sort of epic
Yeah.
societal storytelling, and more intimate, where there's always been both. There will always be both in the theater. But I do think you're right that we skew more towards the intimate now. But I do think it's partly in response to what else is around us.
Mhm.
Yeah.
One thing I'm seeing that I never thought of it until starting to think about this podcast that we were going to do today in this particular way. But I wonder if, on some level, that maybe theaters, and certainly yours truly, have not even acknowledged to themselves. One of the reasons why pre show lectures or talks and a post show talkback of the sort that is a signature piece of Forward's mission, that maybe those have been added in a way as a surrogate for this longer day that you once had. You can come to a show at Forward, even if it's just a 2 hour show, and you're going to get a juicy lecture with a lot of other people sitting around you before the show even begins, with whom you can then talk and do. I see this happening before people go into the theater, and then you can stay afterward and further solidify that sense of community through a talk back. So that can lengthen a 2 hour show into a three and a half hour experience pretty quickly.
Yeah. And that lets people kind of, you know,
Choose.
yeah,
Choose
just
what
be
they want.
a
Choose
little
your
a la carte.
adventure.
Well,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think with something like when Taylor Mack did his 24-decade
Mhm.
history of popular music, which was designed to be a 24-hour show, people did that, right? There are very few people, except the critics who had to be there, that were there for all 24 hours of that piece. They came and they went. or like that art installation, the famous one with the clock, and how
Mhm.
it's something where you could come and go at any hour of the day, even though it was covering a 24-hour period. And that is very close if we think about how you might mirror or marry epic theater to where we are now. That's very close to this idea of being able to choose your own adventure while nevertheless having something expansive for those that want to take it all in. It-
Yeah. Well, and we'd be remiss if we didn't factor in, because this is, of course, a factor in everything in our field. We talked about the fact that for the audience members choosing to attend, there are additional costs for a longer thing, more babysitter hours, more parking fees, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, there are a lot of additional costs on the theater end for a longer play. It's more expensive to run a show that is longer than it is to run a show that is shorter. Um, you know, Theaters that own their own buildings, that have run their own concessions, yes, intermissions can be a chance to make some money. Um, that must be nice. We do not.
Yeah.
We don't get that balance. Many do, but even so, even if I think McNulty talked about this. There could be the theater might be like, oh, I can make a lot of money at the bar, but you are balancing that with a lot of other costs, labor costs, et cetera, in having a show that is longer. And so again, it's not the only factor that gets considered in choosing a season, but it's one of them. It is a factor. Choosing to do, when we chose to program Lewiston and Clarkston, we knew, okay, that's going to come with a lot of extra costs uh, versus a sort of more normal length play. So can never forget that part of it.
One other way in which you can kind of choose your own adventure even now, and taking in as much or as little as you want, is the whole festival model, right? I mean, you had the
Mhm.
medieval morality plays that ran 16 to 20 hours. You have something like American Players Theater, where if you choose, you can go there for a weekend and continue to run into the same people in the different dining establishments or whatever. I'm heading to Stratford next week, which, there's nothing around that except really great vegetables. So the people who are there to see theater and are often there for a week. And you do end up running into people in the talks and the plays that you go to over the course of the day again and again and again. And that creates, in a way that you can sculpt for yourself while also being something part of something larger, a sense of community.
Mhm. Yeah. That sounds so great for all the extroverts listening, and for the introverts, yeah, not so much. But yes, you can
I think it
sculpt your
sounds
own.
wonderful. Yeah.
Well said, Jen.
Me
I feel like we should wind this down, lest our episode on the topic of length in theater become
Yeah, this
a case study
podcast.
on length in
Right.
podcasts. Um, though we could, of course, choose to go much, much longer. I
Right.
think we should say that is it for this episode of Theater Forward, a conversation about theater in Wisconsin, the Midwest, and America. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Jen Uphoff-Gray.
I'm Julie Swenson.
And I'm Mike Fisher. Our podcast is produced by Scott Hayden, who must feel at times as though he's listening to a 24-hour play, having to put up with us
Without an intermission.
without an intermission, as he so patiently and kindly does. Thanks to Scott. You can follow us or share your thoughts on Facebook. To find us, you will find us at Theater Forward. Theater, as always, spelled with an E-R.
And if you enjoyed this podcast, don't forget to subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. And please leave a comment. We'd love to hear from you.
We're so grateful to have you listening, and we will be back soon for another Theater Forward conversation.